Hello everyone and welcome to the Roblox Academy. In this video we will be looking at the pros and cons of a turret CCTV dome camera, which is one of the three styles of cameras you might come across in your search. Now let's start just by looking at three examples of a turret dome, and you might find dozens more if not hundreds of types of domes that might look like this. Don't be put off, they are still all turret domes. The reason they look different is their varying lens and infrared capacity. So for example, the camera at the far right end, the reason it's bigger is it accommodates for a varifocal lens, which is a slightly bigger lens, and therefore you need to have a slightly bigger body. We will touch upon the lens and infrared in another video, but it's just to tell you that the turret domes will come in all shapes and sizes. Another thing you might see is an image like this. Again, a lot of people see an image like this and assume it's a pan tilt zoom camera. It's not. It's literally a turret dome plus a right angle mounting bracket. And just for your own information, the places you might want to use this is in an alleyway or very narrow when you're squeezed within two buildings and you need the camera to protrude off the wall in order to see what's happening down the aisle. So that's where you might find an application for this bracket. When you Google a turret, you might come across the definition of a tower within a tower or a mechanism within a mechanism. And for those of you who have fit a turret dome in the past, you will be familiar with this, which is the breakdown of what a turret dome is made of. So you normally have a mounting base, an enclosure. The main body of the camera you can see is actually on a ball. Which actually means you can mount it on the ceiling or a wall, and we'll touch upon this later on. And finally, you'll have a closing ring, and that's what makes up a turret dome. One of the advantages of this type of design, as you can see, and especially it being a dome, is the cables are all tucked away beneath the base. So if you were in a shop, the cables will go behind the tile, or in a house, it would go behind your soffit board. Now here's an example of a turret dome that's been fit in a residential property in the United Kingdom. You can see the camera looks nice and neat, it's tucked away, it's fairly discreet, and it's going to fulfill the security requirements for this house. You can see the front door on the left hand side, and just a personal opinion is the last thing you would want is a bullet camera at this sort of height. Not only does it compromise your security because a bullet camera can essentially be yanked off and maneuvered in all sorts of directions, but it just looks aesthetically ugly at this sort of height. You've got a clean window on your soffit board, and the last thing you want is a camera hanging off. A bullet is okay when it's out of reach. So we've already touched upon this, but because the turret dome sits on the actual mechanism is on a ball, that means you can ceiling or wall mount it. So when you're bringing your cables down from, let's say, your loft, it means you can actually fit this camera directly onto a wall. In this example, there's an IP enclosure that they've used above the camera, but you don't need to do this. You can actually use a deep base, and sometimes you can drill straight through depending on where the camera is mounted and feed the camera behind the wall. We'll touch upon this in another video. Another advantage of the turret design is there's a lens and infrared separator. Now back in the day, prior to turrets, where people were using what's known as eyeball cameras, and they used a term known as dual ring. What that basically meant is the infrared sits apart from the lens. That prevents something known as IR bleed, which is when the infrared leaks in to the lensing area and gives you a ghosting image. You won't get that with a turret because of this lens and infrared separator. And here's two examples of that technology in practice. So here's an example of a great night image you might get. So in pitch black environments, the turret dome is, I would say, one of the best cameras because not only is it a dome and discreet, but you get a beautiful night image. These days, you can actually get cameras with low light technology where you don't need to rely on the infrared. It's becoming more and more common. One of the advantages being is you actually get a color image. Now, just bear one thing in mind. If you want to have this feature, you should have some light. It cannot operate in pitch black. If you look at the specifications on the camera, it will say color image and then it will give you a lux level. The lower the lux level, essentially the brighter image, and It's basically saying the color image can operate at a lower light level. So just bear that in mind. Now, while this image might look nice and bright, if you were to physically go there, your eyes would see a much darker environment. The reason it appears light is the camera's processing. So again, this is becoming more and more common. And if you are looking out for this, just bear in mind, you want to have some light, a street light, a lamp or something to give you that. Let's look at two of the disadvantages of the camera. First one being, obviously you can see what way the camera is facing. Now, this isn't a disadvantage per se. In domestic, sometimes you want people to be aware that they're being recorded, but in retail environments, perhaps you wouldn't want a pickpocket to be aware what way the camera is facing, and therefore you might want to go for a camera with a plastic cover. Final disadvantage, I would say, is at very vulnerable areas. Perhaps you might want to avoid the turret domes because the mechanism can still to some degree be maneuvered. It can actually be moved around. I'll give you an example. We consulted for quite a number of nightclubs in London many years back, and the cameras were fitted within reach, and therefore we ended up choosing the Vandal Dome for that application, because the last thing you want is the cameras being tampered with. That's it. Thank you for listening to this video. If there are any particular videos you'd like us to make next, please drop a comment in the feedback option below, and please subscribe if you enjoy this video and share with anyone who might be interested. Thank you everyone, and have a lovely day.